Good morning, and welcome to a celebration of women. We are celebrating two important milestones this morning. First, the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, which gave women in our country, finally, the right to vote. And it's the 25th anniversary of the Women's Center of Jacksonville. It began as a resource for women and now provides critical, compassionate, direct services and outreach to approximately 7,200 women and their families each year. So, let's grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and enjoy a celebration this morning, a celebration of women. You know, it was exactly 100 years ago today, August 18th, 1920, that Tennessee became the 36th and final state needed to ratify the 19th Amendment. That meant it became law across the United States. Now, our own state of Florida waited another 50 years before ratifying the amendment. Didn't do that until May of 1969. So while the start of the suffrage movement is linked to the Seneca Falls Conference in 1848, it was 72 years later, in 1920, that it became a reality with the passage and ratification of the 19th Amendment. But you know, in reality, the process took another 64 years to conclude when Mississippi finally became the last state to act on the amendment in 1984. That is a total of 136 years. And because I know you're dying to know, the very first states to ratify the amendment were Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin. They did that just 6 days after the amendment was passed. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is also the 25th anniversary of the Women's Center of Jacksonville. These are both worthy accomplishments, important accomplishments to celebrate, certainly. But why celebrate them together? What's the connection? Well, it's simple. It's grit, it's fortitude, and it's the tenacity to not let anything or anyone get between a woman and her goal. Once we make up our minds, well, you know the rest. But let's be clear. You know, you'll often hear in history books that women were granted or given the right to vote. Nothing could be further from the truth. Those determined women, those suffragettes, through all those years, fought for the vote. It wasn't given to them. They took it. And they did so at great personal peril and sacrifice. Now, you know, the women who are seen at the Jacksonville Women's Center are fighting also. They're fighting to improve their lives and overcome obstacles most of us would find to be incredibly daunting. And those who find their way to the center as a result of sexual assault, they are fighting to take back their lives. They've been violated and traumatized, yet most ultimately refuse to allow that horrible incident to define them or rob them of their sense of self. You see, with the support, compassionate care, and counseling they receive at the Women's Center, and after a lot of hard work and personal sacrifice, these women and their families, they are simply not deterred from living their lives. Many emerge from the experience stronger, smarter, and more self-aware than ever. They may come in as victims, but they leave as survivors. So this celebration of women and their achievements and the ability to rise above what would not be possible without our sponsors and supporters, they have really stepped up to the plate, and it's my pleasure to acknowledge them now. First, to the inimitable Dolores Bar Weaver, who provided us with a matching gift at the sterling sponsorship level. We want to wish you a sincere and heartfelt thanks. Dolores, you are a hero to so many women in this community, but especially to me. I also want to give a very big thank you to the Michael Ward and Jennifer Glock Foundation. also a sterling sponsor. They are two community leaders who give back in so many ways. Also, we extend our gratitude to our activist sponsors, Baptist Health, Fidelity National Financial, Pat and Wayne Hogan, Teresa Miles, Tricia Miley, the Joseph and Carol Thompson Fund, and WJCT. We also want to acknowledge and extend our thanks to our ally and friend level sponsors, Judy Bobeth, the Community Foundation for Northeast Florida, Lisa Everly, the Moran family, Julia and John Taylor, Valley National Bank, Cindy Sadler McCormick, and Kitty Phillips. Let's have a big virtual round of applause for these generous sponsors. I also want to give a shout out to our remarkable and adaptable host committee. You know, we actually met together in March, just a couple of days before our city ground to a halt because of the coronavirus. But you know, that group has stepped up, bounced back, and did all the great things that great people do, and helped bring in all of the sponsors you just heard about. A lot of those folks are my personal friends, and I'm so grateful for their participation. So now, the list that you are now seeing contains the names of the planning committee for the event. They have been equally challenged and have worked equally hard on the logistics and content for everything you'll see and hear this morning. Thank you, Planning Committee, for all you did and all you always do for the Jacksonville Women's Center.
Women at the dawn of the 20th century were impatient for the change that they were realizing in their own lives. Women are able to circulate ideas, they're meeting in clubs, they're getting more opportunities for formal education, and they're seeing themselves as fully formed adults, as citizens.
The fact that women lacked the right to vote in the 20th century was a totally antiquated phenomenon, and Harriet Stanton Blatch was determined to resolve that. Her vision is to bring working class women into the suffrage movement and to link them to middle class professional women. So she puts these two groups of people together in an organization that she calls the Equality League of Self-Supporting Women. Blatch sees this organization as a way to seize control of the New York movement, which had become quite paralyzed, and to move it forward.
The Equality League was open to any woman who earned her daily bread, Blatch said, from a cook to a mining engineer, and we have both of them. Affluent, married, her one daughter already grown, Blatch had never had to earn her own living. She was, she joked, the only parasite in the Equality League. But she believed wage-earning women were the key to finally winning the ballot.
You start to get a broader range of activists involved in the movement, and they know how to go out on strike. They know how to picket. And there's that willingness to be confrontational in order to win one's goals that then they bring to the suffrage movement.
It was a lesson learned from the Pankhursts. As Blatch told the New York World, the question of votes for women had to be pushed out of the parlor and into the streets.
We have ceased to put much energy into discussing the pros and cons of democracy with doubting women in the chimney corners, and have instead gone out on the street corner to appeal to men, to the voters.
Every hour spent perched atop a soapbox, being heckled by crowds and sometimes pelted with stones, heightened the movement's visibility and helped to broaden its base of support. Before long, an auxiliary organization called the Men's League for Women's Suffrage had been formed. Alliances with African American women, members of the Equal Suffrage League of Brooklyn, broached. And high society women persuaded to lend not only their checkbooks, but also their considerable influence. By the fall of 1909, the cause had become actually fashionable. And when Blatch brought her friend, Emmeline Pankhurst, to the U.S. for a lecture tour, the throngs at Carnegie Hall were such that more than 1,000 people had to be turned away. Mrs. Blatch's whole idea, one of her campaigners recalled, was that you must keep suffrage every minute before the public so that they're used to the idea and talk about it, whether they agree or disagree. I think she was quite right.
Good morning. My name is Pat Gilum Sams, and it is my pleasure to be with you this morning as a part of this important event. Well, children, where there is so much racket, there must be something out of kilter. I think that twixt the Negroes of the South and the women in the North, all talking about rights, the white man will be in a fix pretty soon. But what's all this here talking about? The man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. Well, nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me any best place. And ain't I a woman? Look at me. Look at my arm. I have plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could head me. Ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as any man when I could get it, and bear the lash as well. And ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children and seen most of them all sold off to slavery. And when I cried out with a mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. Ain't I a woman? Then they talk about this thing in their head. What is it called? Yeah, that's right, honey. Intellect. Well, what's that got to do with a woman's rights or Negro's rights? If my cup holds a pint and yours holds a quart, wouldn't you be mean not to let me have my little half measure full? Then that little man in the back there, he says women can't have as much rights as men because Christ wasn't a woman. Where did your Christ come from? Where did your Christ come from? From God and a woman. Man ain't had nothing to do with it. And if the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, these women all together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. And now they is asking to do just that. The men better let them. I'm obliged to you for hearing me, and now old Sojourner ain't got nothing else to say. The black abolitionist and former slave born 1797 as Isabella Brumfree, who later changed her name after gaining her freedom in 1827 to Sojourner Truth, spoke to a group of feminists in Akron, Ohio at the Women's Right Convention. This landmark speech is now recognized as one of the most famous abolitionist and women's rights speeches in American history. Sojourner Truth continued to speak out for the rights of African Americans and women during and after the Civil War until her death in 1883. She would become one of the most powerful advocates for human rights in the 19th century. After the Civil War, throughout the 19th century, Black women worked on two fronts simultaneously, reminding Black men and white women that they needed legal rights and equal rights, including the right to vote. It was clear that white women like Susan B. Anthony had primarily a white agenda. Black women sought the ballot for themselves and their men to empower the Black communities besieged by racial terror after the emancipation of slavery. In 1910, women won the vote in dozens of states, and Black women became a powerful voting bloc in northern cities like Chicago. Although the 19th Amendment of 1920 expanded voting rights substantially, it did not end racial terrorism, preventing African Americans from voting, specifically in southern states. I speak the names of Sojourner Truth: Harriet Tubman, Ida B. Wells, Margaret Murray Washington, Mary Church Terrell, Nannie Helen Burroughs. These women, and way too many others that go unnamed, were discriminated against, abused, and raped by white Southerners and Northerners. The strength they showed was passed down from generation to generation of women, like Fannie Lou Hamer, Ella Baker, Diane Nash, Mary McLeod Bethune, who contributed to the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which finally gave the Black woman her full rights to vote. The torch has since been passed down to modern-day sheroes like Dorothy Height, Shirley Chisholm, Barbara Jordan, Angela Davis, Barbara Harris, and Kamala Harris, too. Val Demings, Stacey Abrams, and yes, a mayor named Keisha from Atlanta, just to name a few. The year was 1980, when a young, impressionable first-generation college student hailing from the urban core of Miami, just 9 blocks north of Liberty City, joined a historically Black sorority on the majority white campus of Florida State University. That college student was me. Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated was founded on the campus of Howard University on January 13, 1913. The first public act of this organization was to march in the Women's Suffrage Parade down Pennsylvania Avenue on March 3, 1913, the day before Woodrow Wilson's inauguration. The parade was organized by Alice Paul and Lucy Burns, who founded the Congressional Union for Women's Suffrage. The first of a kind women's suffrage event garnered 5,000 participants and attracted an estimated crowd of over 500,000. Prior to the parade, the issue of Black participation in the march threatened to cause a rift with delegations from the southern states. Therefore, some Black groups did not march with their state delegations. They were instead relegated to a segregated section near the back of the parade. The 22 young collegiate founders of Delta were one of those segregated groups. Even in the midst of protesting for women's rights, discrimination and unequal rights was alive and well, much like the social injustices of today. Black lives matter. As an African American woman, much like Sojourner, I can't separate my Blackness from my being a woman of power, prominence, and purpose. I too am America. Ain't I a woman?
Eager to mobilize African American women, Wells recently had founded the Alpha Suffrage Club, the first Black suffrage organization in Chicago, and she intended to represent it in Alice Paul's parade.
Alice Paul had every expectation that African American women would march African American women had marched in the New York parade, and she had already reached out to African Americans, encouraging them to think about marching. She was quickly disillusioned that that was a good idea when some of the Washington women came to her and said that that simply was not acceptable.
It's a very Southern city. It's a very racist city. These women come to headquarters. They're lifelong Washingtonians, and they know the city. And they tell her, this can destroy your parade.
In a letter, Paul confessed both her quandary and her conclusion. African Americans would not be excluded from the parade, but neither would their participation be encouraged.
The prejudice against Negroes is so strong in this section of the country that I believe a large part, if not a majority, of our white marchers will refuse to participate if Negroes in any number formed a part of the parade. That being the case, as far as I can see, we must have a white procession or a Negro procession, or no procession at all. The best thing is to say nothing whatever about the question, to keep it out of the newspapers, to try to make this a purely suffrage demonstration, entirely uncomplicated by any other problems, such as racial ones.
Alice Paul understands her choices. She understands the stakes in decisions that she makes and the legacies of those sorts of moments, which in the name of expediency, racism is reimposed and furthered rather than challenged. And then we have to remember, like, the whole country is remarkably troubled. And racism is a political fact, and it's a political strategy, which doesn't excuse women who use racism, but it's to say, why do we expect, silently, perhaps naively, why do we expect American women to be distinct from the ideas that animate white American men in the same moment?
Good morning. My name is Teresa Miles, and I have the privilege to serve as the Executive Director of the Women's Center of Jacksonville. Pat Sams, I want to thank you so much for the stories that you've shared and the video that we just saw. Those are the additional reminders of how the struggles, the discoveries, the innovations and achievements, and the accomplishments of people of color have been overlooked and underreported throughout history. It is way past time for that to change. So times have changed to some degree. There was a time when amazing women, like Jacksonville's own Mary Nolan, the only Florida woman to act as a silent sentinel outside of the White House, was arrested and charged for obstructing sidewalk traffic during what became known as a Night of Terror. Nolan and 32 others were imprisoned, tortured, and endured a night of brutal beatings. And today, we simply call that our freedom of speech and our right to assemble. At the Women's Center, we believe in everyone's rights, but we also recognize that oppression and discrimination are realities that still exist, and they serve to marginalize people on the basis of gender, race, class, sexual identity, or orientation, physical ability, and more. I bring this up because today, 25 years after the Women's Center opened its doors, we now look at most of the people that we serve through an intersectional lens, one that addresses the issues that might continue to prevent them from overcoming challenges. This perspective will be an important part of the work that we do moving forward into our next 25 years. 25 years ago, we began as a hub for women who needed help. Essentially, we were an information and referral resource, the brainchild of Shirley Webb and her friend and colleague, Banta Whitner. They worked out of a 2-room office in a house in Riverside, a house that has since been extensively renovated and is now a part of the Jasmine campus. And demands grew. The need for space continued. The Women's Center began offering counseling services as well as educational services, and then more services came. The next few years saw us move to our current building, where we've added additional programs and resources. Over time, the Women's Center has helped thousands and thousands of people overcome trauma and the obstacles that have stood in their way between them and a healthy future. Many of these individuals have suffered as a result of sexual violence. 1 in 6 women experience rape at some point in their lives, and almost 42% of women will have been victimized by some form of sexual violence in their lifetime. Let that sink in for a minute. If we were all at the Hyatt this morning, as we had originally planned, and you were sitting at your table of 10, there is a very high likelihood that 1 or 2 of the women sitting next to you could be among the statistics that I just mentioned. Also, keep in mind that only 1 out of every 4 women actually report their rape. And when we look at women of color, it is 1 out of every 16 women. For men, only 1 in 33 ever report their rape. We are the only provider of sexual assault forensic medical exams to survivors of sexual violence ages 18 and older in this area. When I joined the agency almost 5 years ago, one of the main tasks I was charged with was to raise the money to acquire a space where we could do better by survivors, by providing forensic exams to victims of sexual assault in a place that was safe, comfortable, and supported and cared for, whether they chose to report their crime or not, regardless of their gender. The Weavers were the first to step up to support our vision for this new facility. Once Wayne and Dolores signed on, we were able to purchase a building in February of 2017. We broke ground for renovating that following October, and we opened our doors in May of 2018. We actually opened our doors before our capital campaign was finished. We were anxious to get in there, to serve survivors, to begin that healing process. It was pretty urgent. Amazing participants helped us to get those doors open so quickly, including the City of Jacksonville, Florida Blue, Baptist Health, and private donations. We received from $5 to $100,000. And I get tearful just thinking about the outpouring of support that we received during that time. It was amazing. We're still working to complete the funding for the campaign, which is one of the reasons that all of the proceeds from our sponsors and the donations for this event will directly benefit the J. Wayne and Delores Barr Weaver Sexual Assault Forensic Exam Center. As we work diligently to respond to the needs in our community, I know the center will continue to grow and to evolve. I would be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to the remarkable staff of the Women's Center. Always putting clients and patients first, I have never worked with a more effective or passionate group of people. I also want to tip my hat to our hardworking and committed board of directors. Their support of the staff has never faltered, and their enthusiasm for our work under all circumstances has made it possible for us to continue to innovate and be creative to help the people that we serve, even in the midst of a worldwide pandemic. Although no one knows what other challenges we'll face as the pandemic continues to ebb and flow, the Women's Center of Jacksonville will be here to provide the education, support, and advocacy our clients need and deserve. Thank you for joining us this morning.
At the time we started the center, we did some research on other centers around the country, so it gave us a model. There was a center in Vienna, Virginia, There was a center in Sarasota, and there was a center in Tampa. So there were models out there that we could look at and see. And our goal was to provide services that were not being provided in the community, that we could do and make sure that women had the access to those services that they weren't getting anywhere else.
So now here we are, looking at 25 years of history with the Women's Center and a really solid foundation. I can tell you one of the most remarkable times was actually seeing the Sexual Assault Forensic Exam Center come to reality. We had started a capital campaign. The first to step forward, of course, were the Weavers. And once we secured that initial amount of money, we were able to purchase a building.
Once someone has experienced a sexual assault, it's our purpose to come in and assess their needs and to see what ways that our organization can help them. That could be anything from validating their experience and telling them that we believe them, or it can be offering them information so that they have a better perspective of what their next step is going to be.
As far as JSO working with Women's Center, we have an excellent working relationship. Sarah Weiss, the director of the rape recovery team, and Teresa Miles are both very easy to engage with and easy to interact with. Whenever there's a concern or whenever there's anything that's come up, positive or negative, I think we're all quick to share information.
We collaborated with other nonprofits from the very beginning. It was important to us to pull together coalitions and groups. Every grant we applied for just about included 2 or 3 other partners that were going to help us. And also, it was reciprocal because we really wanted to be partnered with those agencies.
I once had a case where the survivor had never experienced any traumatic experiences in their life prior to that moment. That experience essentially drove them into some suicidal ideations and some other mental health issues. Through counseling and consistent work on her mental health, she was able to overcome those instances and even take her perpetrator to court, in which she was able to stand in front of the judge and actually speak to advocate for herself.
I listened to some of the testimonies from some of the sexual assault victims or survivors who are out there thriving now, and where they came from and where they are now. And you can't help but know that we made a difference in their life.
One of the things that we did that evening was we had a wall, and on that wall were words that survivors of sexual assault often feel. The shame, the embarrassment. All of those words we placed on that wall, and then we had this amazing sledgehammer. It was a golden sledgehammer. And the people who were at that event, they would pick up that golden sledgehammer and they would just knock down those walls, because those are the things that keep women and men from coming forward, from reporting what has happened to them. That shame, that embarrassment, and we have to knock that down.
If you ever have a friend or a loved one who's ever in need of our services but doesn't feel comfortable coming to us, you can always come to us, gather information, and you can provide that to the survivor. One thing you can give them specifically is our hotline, and you can encourage them to call our hotline on their own. They can call anonymously just to get information and just to see kind of what we do and to get a feel for if that's something that they want to do.
This is a crime that is hidden and that is covered up by bad guys all over the world in an effort to be able to do them in the future. So in their effort to be known in the community, they are helping people put so many plans together for the future, and they don't even realize it.
One of the areas that we have really been focusing on is the reality that nothing happens in isolation. When you look at a woman, and then you potentially look at a woman of color, and maybe a woman of color who's an immigrant, you have so many different levels that are challenging, that could be barriers to helping people really overcome multiple traumas.
One thing I really appreciate about working at the Women's Center is we're able to offer not just our interventions through the rape recovery team, but we're able to connect our survivors with other services that may help with their healing process or just personal improvement.
I've always felt like, these amazing sacrificial women who came together to make this happen. But then when you sit and you look at photographs and you see people on the floor digging up carpeting and painting walls and, going from this little room in Riverside to now being, 2 full centers with 42 employees when it started with volunteers. That history of the Women's Center, it was really inspiring, for me. I do get truly choked up. And I think about Shirley and Banta and all of the other women. It makes me very proud to be kind of a part of this next chapter in the Women's Center. COVID-19 changed how we do business. Being a human service organization, to suddenly realize that you aren't going to have that human contact with your clients, with the people that you serve, with your community, it's tough. It's really tough. Our staff were so nimble. I think that has been an important part for all of us, is that you have to be able to respond to what's happening. It's what we try to help our clients deal with. We call it our resiliency zone, and there are things that are going to knock you right outside of that comfort zone. And it did for all of us. The fact that we were able to actually go remote, and now here we are, several months later, and we are still remote. I think that we're better for it. Ultimately, I really do.
Well, from my perspective, the Women's Center's future is bright. This is a hard time right now, and everybody's struggling, but we've done what we needed to do to keep the agency going. I'm encouraged that they will go on and do big things. I think the Women's Center is going to be around for a long time.
Wasn't that terrific? I don't think anything could better demonstrate the compassionate care, understanding, and advocacy provided by the Women's Center to survivors and their families as they heal. I also want to thank our good friends at WJCT Public Broadcasting and their sister station, WGBH, which produces The American Experience. They allowed us to use some of the video clips you saw earlier from their documentary, The Vote. The programming around the centennial has just been outstanding. So now, I have the great pleasure to introduce this morning's keynote speaker, the Honorable Melissa Nelson, State Attorney for the 4th Judicial Circuit. Melissa took office as a state attorney in January 2017. She leads 300 plus attorneys, staff, and investigators in their pursuit of justice. She was re-elected without opposition this year. In 1997, Melissa began her career as an assistant state attorney, and for the next 12 years prosecuted cases ranging from misdemeanors to capital murder. Following that, she worked at the international law firm of McGuire Woods. Since taking office, Melissa has implemented many smart justice initiatives and spearheaded criminal justice reform. She established Florida's first conviction integrity review unit, developed a driver's license restoration program, convened a juvenile justice advisory committee aimed at reducing juvenile recidivism, and engaged her office in an academic research study focused on making data-driven decisions. Each of these accomplishments reinforced her pledge to the citizens of Clay, Duval, and Nassau counties to prosecute cases fairly and transparently. Melissa earned both her undergraduate and law degrees with honors from the University of Florida. I also have the real privilege of being able to call Melissa Nelson my friend. Please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Melissa Nelson.
Good morning. It is my honor to speak with you about the important work and success of the Women's Center of Jacksonville on its 25th anniversary. It is even more significant because we celebrate this milestone on the centennial of women gaining the right to vote in America. Although the suffragist movement began somewhere around 1850, it experienced considerable propulsion in the early 20th century. The end of the First World War introduced America to the idea of what newspapers called the New Woman, who had served her country and entered public service as nurses, ambulance drivers, and telephone operators near the front lines. The earliest suffragists were influenced by the female-forward leadership structure of Native American communities, such as the Seneca Iroquois, and were spurred by the abolition movement. Historian Adele Logan Alexander recently opined that the suffrage movement was, quote, not one person nor one event, but the scarcely recorded efforts of anonymous women of all races, educational, and economic levels who for decades talked with neighbors, held meetings, challenged their fathers, sons, husbands, and employers, often putting themselves in physical and economic jeopardy to do so. It struck me how relevant these actions of boldness are to present day. Many of the same themes for which these women fought then are still in headlines today. But as history taught us, change seldom happens without dialogue, movement, innovation, and risk. The 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution was passed by Congress in 1919 and was ratified by 3/4 of the then 48 states on August 18, 1920. While there are certainly parallels to society as it existed in 1920, in the 100 years since the 19th Amendment's ratification, much has also changed. In 1920, the average cost of the daily newspaper was 2 cents. A box of cornflakes was 11 cents. A brand new Ford Model T could have cost you around $300. Prohibition was imposed, radio was king, and jazz was beginning to take the world by storm. And the Charleston was the dance of the day. Probably not going to find that one on my kids' TikTok feed. And since 1920, women have shattered all kinds of ceilings. We have flown planes, traveled to space, sparked civil rights movements, saved lives, fought for freedoms, and become fierce advocates for change. Just in the legal and criminal justice space, to name a few trailblazers. In 1981, Sandra Day O'Connor was the first female appointed as Justice of the United States Supreme Court. In 1978, Janet Reno became the first female state attorney in Florida, and in 1992 became the first female Attorney General of the United States. Duval County's own judge, Susan Black, has a list of firsts. In Florida, she became the first female assistant state attorney in 1969 in the office I work, the first female county court judge in 1973, the first female circuit judge in 1975, and the first female federal judge in 1979. Locally, we continue to build on Judge Black's legacy. When I took office almost 4 years ago, there were 2 women in leadership roles across all 3 counties in my office. Now, over 50% of our leadership is female. A fun fact, in addition to her myriad other feats, our host this morning and my friend Audrey Moran was the first female director in the state attorney's office's history. We recognize all of the incredible women who have come before us and achieved so much for society and for our community and for us. But our work is never done. At the state attorney's office, we strive to be better tomorrow than we are today, and that same spirit is evident in the work of the Women's Center of Jacksonville. This event acknowledges the successes of the years past and welcomes the triumphs yet to come. One such success, which will enjoy many more victories ahead, is the J. Wayne and Dolores Bar Weaver SAFE Center. The center, which opened in 2018, plays a critical role in the treatment and recovery of victims of crime in Baker, Duval, and Nassau counties. The compassionate and skilled staff at SAFE serves victims of sexual assault with respect and dignity in the worst moments of a survivor's life. I know this firsthand because my dear sister is a sexual assault nurse with the SAFE Center. The SAFE Center also provides crisis intervention, counseling, and emotional support for survivors and their loved ones. The SAFE Center is the only certified rape crisis center in our area. They provide these services 24/7, no matter a survivor's gender and whether or not they report their assault to law enforcement. As a prosecutor, I've seen countless and compelling moments where the best of our work has translated into positive victim support in the aftermath of harm. But there are limitations to the healing work that can be done in and through a criminal justice agency like ours. That's why the services of the Women's Center of Jacksonville are so tremendously important in addressing the holistic needs of victims, their families, in filling gaps between services, and in identifying problems and recommending important next steps for practitioners in the pursuit of justice, safety, and healing. So please join me in celebrating the achievements of women throughout our history, our nation, our community, and chiefly of the Women's Center of Jacksonville, whose advocacy, support, and education play such an impactful role in the lives of countless men, women, children, and their families in Northeast Florida. And don't forget to exercise the right so many fought for. Go vote. Congratulations on your first 25 years, and my best wishes for the next 25.
Melissa, that was just great. Thank you so much. All of us appreciate your hard work on behalf of women and girls in our justice system and your commitment to serve our community in a fair and transparent manner. You know, Jacksonville is filled with many accomplished, impressive women. And even though we need to acknowledge that we still have a ways to go, and that sometimes it feels like we're fighting for the same things we fought about 50 years ago, pay equity, C-suite and board level positions, reproductive rights, there are a lot of success stories out there that we need to remember and acknowledge. Shirley Webb is one of those stories. During her career, Shirley spearheaded, founded, and ran 3 important organizations that support women, and all of them continue to flourish today. Shirley Webb became involved with the women's movement in the early 1970s and began answering calls on a new hotline that had been launched for victims of sexual assault and domestic violence. But there was one problem. There was nowhere to send people for help. So Shirley founded Hubbard House in 1976 and served as its very first executive director. Shirley left Hubbard House in 1981 to raise her family and go back and finish her degree, graduating from UNF with a degree in political science. She went straight into graduate school, studied mental health counseling, and in 1986 started the UNF Women's Center as a volunteer, going on to be hired as its first paid executive director. Shirley received lots of calls from the community at large in addition to her students on campus, and she knew Jacksonville had the need and the capacity to support a similar setting outside of UNF. When she received her master's degree, she left UNF and started the Women's Center of Jacksonville in 1995. And the rest, as they say, is history. She served as executive director of the Women's Center for 20 years, retiring in 2015, growing and expanding services throughout her tenure. So, it's for all these reasons and more that we have created the Shirley Webb Leadership Award for Excellence. The award will be presented periodically to an individual or organization that has gone over and above expectations and who positively supports women and girls in our community. So it is my real pleasure to introduce you to Shirley Webb, who will present her namesake award for the very first time.
What a lovely introduction, and what an incredible honor. Thank you, Audrey and Teresa, and to everyone who had a hand in putting this whole event together. I know it would have been so wonderful to all gather in person for this celebration, but I think you have done a terrific job staging this virtual event. Thank you. As if being in this position isn't humbling enough, it now falls to me to introduce and present the award to Dolores Bar Weaver, the most revered and respected person it's ever been my privilege to know. In my opinion, Dolores is, at her core, a teacher. Yet I don't know if she's ever thought of herself in those terms. From the moment the Weavers brought the Jaguars to Jacksonville, Dolores taught us what a true servant leader looks like. She taught the entire community a whole new way, the right way, to think about philanthropy. She taught us how to be humble and how to leverage funds and raise more funds. She stood up for issues that didn't always bode well with many of the more conservative donors in our community, especially in the early days. She wanted everyone to see that she unabashedly supported Planned Parenthood with the goal of getting others to follow her lead. And they did. She created partnerships with all the media outlets in town for her Straight Talk program to help reduce the incidences of teen pregnancy and the spread of sexually transmitted infections among teens. She was among the first of established Jacksonville philanthropists to solidly support Jasmine's work with LGBTQ youth. She helped found the Women's Giving Alliance to get more women involved in and passionate about philanthropy for women and girls. And she has been a champion for the Women's Center through grants and challenge matches almost since its inception. I don't think I could ever really articulate all that I've learned from Dolores, and I know many of you watching today can say the same thing. She's smart, direct, genuine, gracious, and so much more. For all these reasons and more, I was honored to present the first award to bear my name to Dolores Bar Weaver a few days ago. Due to the coronavirus, she and Wayne are both staying very close to home with limited contact. She did record a message that we will play for you now. It is my great pleasure to present to Dolores Bar Weaver the Shirley Webb Leadership Award for Excellence from the Women's Center of Jacksonville. Dolores, you so deserve this.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Well, I have to work hard to deserve it, that's for sure. So thank you very much,
You definitely
Shirley.
do.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Shirley, for your very kind words. It is in your honor that I proudly accept this award, and that it's named for you makes it even more special. Thank you for the years of compassionate care you've given to the women of Jacksonville and beyond, a time that most of us can never imagine. You gave hope where there was none. You offered support when they didn't know where to go, and you gave them courage to believe in a better tomorrow. On behalf of all women, I thank you. I have received far too many awards since coming to Jacksonville, and I'm ever mindful of doing all I can for each one of them. Today, as we stand on the shoulders of brave and wonderful women 100 years ago that won the right for us to vote, let us honor them by exercising that vote. Thanks to the Women's Center for this honor, and more importantly, thank you for the work you do every day. This award does not mean the work is finished, and I am instead encouraged to continue the work wherever I can. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Sally Suslak, and I have the distinct honor of serving as the current chair of the Women's Center's Board of Directors. I hope you all have been enjoying this morning's event and have a new appreciation for how we are all tied together. From winning the vote 100 years ago to women becoming more involved in elective office, who then in turn support and fund programs that benefit women, families, the disadvantaged, and marginalized. Unfortunately, no nonprofit agency can be all things to all people, and people show up in need of help in many areas of their lives. That's why we partner and collaborate with a host of other local agencies and organizations, without which we could not fully help and offer support to our clients. The organizations you see listed on your screen work together to help people in our community, and we are proud to be their co-collaborators. Without a coordinated effort to serve those in need in the most effective and efficient way, we wouldn't be able to support even a fraction of those to whom we provide services now. We would be remiss not to include these partners and collaborators in our anniversary celebration, since all of them contribute to the successful outcomes many of our clients experience. We've never needed this collective as much as we do right now, and we sincerely thank each of these agencies for their good work. They make it possible for Women's Center's clients to overcome obstacles and live better and more hopeful lives. Thanks for joining us this morning. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you, Sally. I want to first acknowledge the beautiful award that Shirley presented to Dolores earlier. The original ceramic artwork was created especially for the Shirley Webb Award by artist Megan Reed, who also works at the Cultural Council of Greater Jacksonville. Megan's piece was selected for the award during a competitive submission process. We are just thrilled with the result, as was Dolores when she received the award. Well, it's been quite a year, hasn't it? Most of us are still living cautiously, working remotely, staying close to home, and so many are struggling emotionally, socially, and financially. You know, the same is true for many of the nonprofits in our community. For those who provide direct service and work on the front lines within the safety net, it has been a stressful time. People are still homeless. People still need medical care for emergencies outside of COVID-19. And unfortunately, people are still getting sexually assaulted every day. That is where you come in. You can make a big difference right now, this very moment, by texting Thrive25 to the number on the screen. Fidelity National Financial has told us that if we can raise $5,000 using text to give between now and midnight tomorrow, they will match it with another $5,000. So you can help raise $10,000 just by texting Thrive25 to the number on the screen and follow the prompts. You know, we're asking for contributions of $25 or more if you have the means in honor of the Women's Center's 25th anniversary. Or feel free to celebrate the centennial of the 19th Amendment with a contribution of $100 or more. Again, if you're able. You know what? And if you donate $10, that's okay too. And it is equally appreciated. You know, the reality is donations have slowed some since the beginning of the pandemic for all nonprofits and for the Women's Center as well. But the need for the services of the Women's Center has remained constant. And we simply cannot, we will not walk away from those who need us the most. So pick up your phone right now and text Thrive25 to 44321. Then just follow the prompts. It's easy and simple to complete. When you do, you may choose to allow your name to appear on the screen, and you can donate anonymously. It's completely up to you. But the important thing is to do it. Even if you donate just a few dollars, you are helping us raise $10,000. Those funds will go a long way to helping our survivors get the support and services they need from the Safe Center. Now just imagine if you or someone you love was a victim of a sexual assault. Wouldn't you want to know that you or they could turn to people you knew were going to help, folks who understood what you've been through and were there to support you? It is critical to make sure that the Safe Center will continue to operate and be there when this happens to someone tomorrow or next week or next year. And that's what your donation today will help us assure. So come on, pick up that phone and text us your donation now. We need your help. Help us celebrate the centennial of suffrage. Help us celebrate 25 years of the Women's Center. There's been so much excitement around this fundraising that we raised $10,000 last night at 8 o'clock. That was Farah and Farah. Thank you, Farah and Farah. And we've already been getting texts this morning. Let's see. Oh my goodness. We are already to almost $3,100. Keep going. Remember, this is a match. The match is what makes it all worth it. Every dollar you raise gets another dollar matched to it, and $10,000 can help so many women. This is a way to show how you support women, how you stand with women, and how you understand that the work of the Women's Center is so, so critical. We have, oh, here we go, lots more people coming in. I know my good friend, oh, there's Nancy Bronner. Thank you, Nancy Bronner. She runs One Jacks, a partner organization. I know my friend Michael Munns just texted a little bit ago, and we raised $500 from him. Thank you, Michael. Oh, there's Martha Baker, $259. $504 from Michelle Braun. Oh my goodness, everybody is coming through. Keep going, we've got more time to go. We want to also, as so many people have given, we have loads and loads of people to thank. You know, we're thanking our sterling sponsors, Dolores Bar Weaver and Michael Ward and Jennifer Glock. Oh my gosh, we've hit the goal. Oh my gosh, I have chills. Thank you. Look at what you've done. That's, oh my gosh, keep going. That is so incredible. I am choked up in just a few short minutes. You helped raise $10,000 for the Women's Center. You know, we've had the Florida Blue and Farah, Joseph and Carol Thompson, Tricia Miley and Jim Swartz, Pat and Wayne Hogan, Baptist Health, Black Knight, Rogers Towers, Fidelity National Financial, so many people coming together, and all of you coming together to say we support women. We're almost to $6,000. This is just incredible. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your generosity. The text to give function will remain live until midnight tomorrow night. And no one said we couldn't raise way more than $10,000. Please look for the instructions again on our Facebook page and Twitter feed. So please encourage your friends to jump on board. This broadcast will be made available shortly on our social media pages. So please share it with anyone you know who might have missed it. Thank you to Melissa Nelson. Thank you to Pat Gilum Sams. Thank you to Shirley Webb. Thank you to Teresa Miles and the fabulous staff at the Women's Center. Thank you for all joining us this morning. Now go out and own your day. Thank you.